This will be the first time I have ever told anyone this. Even now, speaking about it, it was one of the most terrifying situations I have ever been in. To this day, I tend not to look out my window in the dark. It was October time last year, and I needed to catch a break. So I did what any normal person would do, and looked up social media for a getaway break. I've been single for 2 years now, and I usually do these things by myself. I find it a good way to get away from everything. I came across a blog about wilderness experience. You would stay in a cabin out in the woods with one gigantic window that looks out at the wilderness. The cabin isn't much of a cabin at all. It is quite small, basically just one room, one gigantic window, a bed facing the window, and a small bathroom. So I booked it that very weekend. The drive was uneventful. It took 2 hours to get there. When I was booking, I was told I was going to meet a man named Tom. Tom owned the cabin and, I presume, the land that it was on. I drove into a laneway. The lane went on for about 5 minutes of windy roads, gritted gravel, and shrubs on each side. The further I went in, the denser the shrubbery and trees became. I pulled up in front of a big, square, white house. As I got out of the car, the gravel underneath sank me just a little bit by my own weight. I walked up to the door and rang the doorbell, then took 2 steps back. The door opened immediately. An old man greeted me at the door. He was around 5 feet 6 inches, bald, in his 60s or 70s, wearing blue jeans. "Hello there." "Hi. I have a booking in the getaway cabin." Yes, come in. "We were expecting you." I walked up the 2 steps and into the house. The house was pretty regular except for the gigantic ceilings above. There was a small desk to the right-hand side, where the old man went behind. "Okay, so what time would you like breakfast at?" said Tom. Any time really. I'm not in any rush." "Okay, we'll say 9:30. "Yeah, that's great." "And what experience are you looking for?" asked Tom. How do you mean?" I replied, puzzled by the question. "Well, we have seasonal experiences around here, and because it's coming up to October, we have horror, or you can jump ahead and go straight to Christmas. The experiences are up to you. Here is the list." The list was an A4 sheet of paper. It had an option for 4 items. Number 1, Christmas, and then just beside it, in brackets, it said Santa Claus. Number 2 was horror, and beside it, in brackets, it said Halloween. Number 3 was New Year's. Number 4 was Thanksgiving. Which one is the best?" I asked the man, still confused by the offer. "Well, while you're here, you will still get the whole experience of the wilderness, but what happens tonight will be completely up to you. Personally, I do think you should avoid the Christmas one, as we are still in October. But are you brave enough to pick horror?" I did want to get away from everything for a while. I didn't think I was going to be getting such a confusing offer. So, I looked at the man, took a brave breath in, and said, "Sure, nothing scares me. Go on, I'll do the horror." "Excellent choice. So here are your keys. Your cabin is just out the door here, down the path through the woods, and you will see it in the middle of the field. Go there, and there are a number of items in the room. Beside these items will be a little note on how to use them. I recommend you keep the lights off. Otherwise, when it gets dark out, you won't be able to see anything out your window. But if you keep the lights off, your eyes will adjust. So please, just remember that." I thanked the old man. I took the keys and went back to my car to collect my things. I followed the man's instructions towards the cabin. It was around 4 p.m. at the time. It was slowly getting to dusk as I arrived at the small cabin. The cabin was no larger than 8 foot tall. It was a brown square wooden box with one gigantic window overlooking the tree lines. I walked up to the cabin, unlocked the door, and let myself in. When I came in, there was one chair facing the window, a small fridge to my left-hand side, my bed to my right, not facing the window, and a small bathroom barely big enough for one person. There were a number of random items in the room. The first one I noticed was a pair of binoculars. The binoculars had a note beside them that said, "Use me at nighttime. I am night vision." The next items I noticed were earplugs. The note beside the earplugs said, "Use me if the wind gets too loud." Finally, there was a notebook. The note beside it said, "Write down your experiences here." After settling myself in, I decided to take a seat on the chair, pulled over the binoculars, and put them on to see what was in the wilderness. It was around 5 p.m. at this point. Off in the distance was an apple tree. For small baby deer came out and slowly moved their way over to the apple tree, picking at it. The two main deer walked behind the baby deer. It was quite an unbelievable sight, one that, if I wasn't in this cabin and I was standing outside, would surely never happen because the deer would have been too afraid once they saw me. But behind this window, I could see everything in the wilderness. At 7 p.m. it was pitch black. At this point, I had all the lights off, staring out into the shadows. The night vision binoculars were working. You could see everything in a dark green palette. As I was there gazing out into the wild, I heard a knock on my door. I got up out of my chair and opened it, and not to my surprise, there was no one there. I figured this was one of the horror experiences. It did give me butterflies in my stomach, excited ones. So I sat back down with a small grin on my face. Suddenly, as I looked out the window, something just ran by. I could barely make it out, but it was definitely in the figure of a human. I picked up my night vision goggles to have a look. Searching far and wide, I found nothing. It must have been just my eyes adjusting, or again, just another one of these horror experiences. For the next 2 hours, nothing really happened. I drank 2 beers as I sat in the chair, opened a bag of chips, and just listened to the wind. I wrote down some of my experiences. I wrote down noticing the deer, someone knocking on the door, and something running by the window. I read back on a few of the entries. Nothing out of the ordinary except one from 4 weeks ago. It was from a woman named Mary. She said that she also had knocks on her door and saw something or someone running by. She said that she regretted picking the horror option. I told myself I should get ready for bed, but not before I had another look outside using the night vision binoculars. Again, I searched wide and far. Then I noticed something way off in the tree line. 2 small dots lit up. The more I stared at the 2 dots, the more an outline of a figure emerged. It looked like a really skinny man. The man had really long hair coming down his face. Out from the 2 dots, which I presumed were his eyes, he was hunched over with his shoulders out in front, but his arms were long and skinny. I stared at him for nearly a minute, wondering why there was a man out in the woods at this time. This was surely another horror experience happening. I stood up from my chair, still in complete darkness. I lowered my binoculars, trying to see if my naked eyes could see the man, and to no surprise, I couldn't, as it was way too dark outside. So I put the binoculars back up to my eyes. That's when I noticed the man was now standing outside of the tree line, closer to me. The tree line was about 100 meters away from the cabin. All in front of me was overgrown grass blowing in the wind. The hunched man never moved, his shoulders still pointing towards me, with his arms nearly down as far as his knees. His hair was still slicked down his face. My heart began to speed up. What was actually happening here? Is this part of the horror experience that the old man welcomed? Again, lowering my binoculars, I decided to take a sip of water and then put the binoculars back up to my eyes. Now, the figure was about 50 meters away. He was a lot taller than I first expected. I don't know how he got this close so quickly. I took a sip of water for only 3 seconds. How could he move that fast? Since he was closer, I noticed he was breathing heavily. I noticed his arms and body were full of scabs. His facial features became clearer the closer he got, and yet he still didn't move. As I stared, I could see his eyes were staring directly at me. I decided to grab my phone and call Tom. I was worried that this wasn't all part of the experience. I searched for Tom's name on my phone, found it, put the phone to my ear, and looked up. The man or figure was now only 10 feet away from the window. At this point, I did not need binoculars at all. The figure was taller than the cabin itself. Its eyes were fixated on me. Its hair was no longer covering its face. Its wide mouth was left hanging open. Its long arms moved up and down as its body was breathing. I kept my eyes on the figure as Tom wasn't answering his phone. The figure's head shifted upwards, looking into the sky. Its neck was long and skinny. Its hair was falling down the back of its head, revealing its skinny, stretched abdomen. It roared in a high-pitched voice. I put my hands to my ears. The noise was unbearable. I grabbed the earplugs that were left in the cabin. I reached for the light switch to turn on the lights. The lights were blinding as they came on. I looked back out the giant window but could only see the reflection of myself. Then something banged against the window. Pushed up against the window was one of the baby deer I saw earlier. It was lifeless. Wrapped around its neck were 5 long, gray fingers. The loud scream came back again. I pressed my hands against my ears yet again, keeping an eye on the window. The deer vanished as if thrown away from the glass. The screaming slowly deteriorated into silence. All there was silence, me and my reflection. I hesitantly went to go and turn off the light switch. I took a deep breath, closed my eyes and flicked the switch. Slowly opening them, I noticed nothing. There was nothing there, only the vast field and the tree line. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. The next morning I went back to Tom's house to check out. I rang the doorbell to be greeted by Tom. "Why, hello. Welcome," Tom said in surprise. I was just about to come down with your breakfast." "Yeah, that's quite all right. I honestly didn't get a wink of sleep last night, and I need to go home. But thank you so much. I'm going to hit the road as soon as I can." "That's no problem at all. Come on in and I'll check you out," Tom said in a welcoming manner. I stepped back into the high-ceilinged hallway. I handed over the keys to Tom as he took out the card machine for me to pay. "So you must have had a hell of an experience last night, then?" Tom smiled gleefully. "Yeah, you weren't kidding with the horror experience anyway," I replied in a friendly laugh. "Oh, it's just a little bit of fun. It wasn't supposed to scare you that hard," Tom said proudly. "Well, I just couldn't sleep. Knowing there could be someone just standing outside my cabin the whole night," I laughed back. Then Tom said it. "Oh, I don't be standing out in the middle of the field all night. I just do a simple knock and run by, that's all," Tom said nonchalantly. "Yeah, and the tall, skinny man who was off in the tree line?" I said, raising my brow, still putting on a grin. "Excuse me? What tall, skinny man? We only have one experience here for horror, and that's me knocking on the door and running by. What man in a field are you talking about?" Tom finished speaking lower with each word he said, staring at me, worried. Then it hit me. If it wasn't him that was out in that field staring at me, then what was it? The first incident occurred a week ago, 3 days after the mirror arrived. I woke up at 7:30 in the morning to a chilling cold, so disabling I could barely get out of bed. You might think that's just me being a dramatic teenager, but it was a cold like I'd never experienced before. Cut through the skin. I visited cousins in Norway on Christmas holidays that were warmer. My first thought was that the central heating hadn't been turned on, which was strange in itself considering that's the first thing my mum does in the morning. She wakes up each day at 6 on the dot, so when I get up an hour and a half later the house is usually nice and toasty. I don't expect her to do these things like some spoiled brat. If that's what you're thinking, she just does them because she's a considerate mother. Anyway, I assume she had either slept through her alarm or that, for whatever reason, it had failed to go off. Jane Harris isn't exactly the type of person to sleep through an alarm, so I decided it must be the latter. Once I'd plucked up enough courage to confront the piercing cold, I headed for her bedroom. In the corridor, the wood flooring felt like ice beneath my bare feet, and I instantly regretted not putting my slippers on. Her door was closed when I reached it, which was odd because she usually keeps it slightly ajar for the cat to go in and out throughout the night. I put my ear to the solid wood but heard nothing. I knocked twice. No answer. I knocked again, the added force stinging my knuckles. Again, no answer. At this point I was quite worried, and a vicious image suddenly entered my mind of my mother in some type of danger. Hastily, I opened the door. However, when I entered the room, I saw that she wasn't in danger at all. In fact, she wasn't even asleep. She was sat in her chair, fully dressed, looking into the mirror. "Is everything okay, Mum?" I asked. At first she didn't notice me, but after a few seconds she caught my reflection and smiled. "Hello, darling," she said. I flinched. There was something about her voice, something that sounded off. I could feel my guts suddenly churn, and the sensation of a deep pit opening in my chest overwhelmed me. Inhaling deeply, I tried to gather myself. And then it hit me. I'd heard that voice before. It must be the cold, I quickly realized, shaking my head. God knows how long Mum had been sitting there wearing only her work clothes. She had probably caught the flu or something. Are you okay? I asked again. She didn't answer. Mum, I caught the hint of a frown in her mirror's reflection, so I called out to her again, and this time she turned around to face me. For a moment it was like looking into the eyes of a stranger, and then she sprang to life. Sorry, she said, color suddenly rushing into her face. Something must have come over me. She pulled herself up from her chair, looked around the room and frowned. Gosh, isn't it cold in here? She remarked. The second incident happened yesterday. I woke up in the middle of the night needing to pee, accosted by the same violent cold. On my way to the bathroom with my slippers on this time, I heard a noise from the end of the corridor. It was coming from my mum's room. Curious, I detoured towards the noise, my ears alert. It was dark in the corridor, so I tried flicking the table lamp on and almost knocked a framed picture off the wall. It was my parents' old wedding photo, the only image of Dad Mum refuses to take down. I turned on the lamp, readjusted the picture and continued moving. I reached the end of the corridor and perked my head around the corner. Again, Mum's door was closed, but I gathered she was awake from the thin glow beneath her door, and from the noises. They were louder now, and they were coming from her room. I crept silently forward, edging towards the door, turning my head to listen. It was a cry. Someone was in her room crying. A chill ran down my spine like a bolt. I wanted to run away, but my body propelled me forward, my hand reaching for the doorknob and twisting. I flung myself into her room. The cold was like a tundra. My mum was sitting in front of the mirror, staring into her reflection, her nightie barely covering her thin shoulders. Her body was still, but her mouth was open, and a deep cry, a man's cry, flooded out of it. A cry I'd heard before, but not from her lips. I screamed. I ran over to my mum and shook her. She remained still, completely unaware of my presence, her eyes hooked to the pair in the mirror. I reached beneath her arms and pulled her from the chair. Her body felt like the heaviest object in the world, and it took every inch of my strength to lift her. We both went crashing to the floor. The crying ceased. What the actual fuck, Mum? I said to her, still shaking. I helped her up off the floor, barely able to lift myself. Her face looked gaunt and frayed. We need to get rid of that mirror, I told her. She turned to face me, her eyes like hollowed shells. Your dad wouldn't like that, she said. And that's when I freaked out. My dad's been missing for almost 2 years. As soon as she said that, I left. I'm at my friend's house right now. I don't know how long I can stay here, but at some point, I need to return home. I don't know what to do.
Thank you for watching these terrifying tales. Sometimes the scariest mysteries lie just beyond what we can see, lingering in the unknown. If these stories gave you chills, don't forget to hit the like button, share with friends who love a good scare, and let us know in the comments which part was the most spine-chilling for you. Subscribe for more haunting stories, and as always, remember to keep an eye on the shadows around you. You never know who or what might be watching. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.